From the pages of Masatoshi Nakayama's books to the competition mats, Kime is defined as the ultimate decisive focus. But does it belong in the antique forms? In this episode of Great Karate Myths, we strip back the layers of tradition to ask if modern Kime is actually hindering your ability to fight effectively. Join us as we debunk the legend of the lockout. Kime, what is it, Tom?
No, Matt, you gave us such a brilliant breakdown. I think as we were just chatting before starting. So yeah, can you go over that again?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, to the best of my understanding, Kime is it's a noun form of the verb kimeru, which, pardon the pronunciation, which means to decide, to make a determined choice or have a settled way of doing something in the ordinary usage of the word. And I suppose when it comes to use within Budo traditions and martial arts, karate particularly, it's become used to describe sharp, decisive focus and power in techniques, or as they land to finish whatever the situation is. And a little bit of research on that. Now the Kime is used as a word in various pieces of literature, from like Gichin Funakoshi, but it's actually discussed in Masatoshi Nakayama's Best Karate series, particularly in a section called What Karate Do Is, and where he defines Kime as decisive muscular contraction and mental focus in technique execution. So that's an interesting definition and an interesting launching point, I think.
I think the reason we're talking about it today is that it's something that's seen across the board in karate. So it exists in, generally speaking, all styles. It's there. It's very prominent in competitions. It's a point of scoring in competitions, actually, for particularly kata competition. You see it in the basics, the forms, across Shotokan and Wadaru and Goju-ryu. So yeah, we're talking about it to kind of look at some ideas of where it comes from. Should it really be there, particularly with regards to the antique forms? And is it something that perhaps has become overemphasised in karate as well? Does it need to be there in the way that it is? So yeah, that's why we're kind of talking about it today.
Yeah, I think it very much relates to our previous discussion on Ike Nisatsu. It's an idea that seems to come hand in hand with that idea of delivering maximum power and the right intent at the moment of impact. The idea of finishing with one blow, it's something that is decisive. The idea of finishing with one blow, and I suppose that necessarily incorporates the idea of Kime.
It's interesting to note, though, that there are different levels of it. So and sometimes it's mistranslated as some sort of extrapolation of the intent to focus. So it's conflated with the term focus. But the interestingly, that the Shukukai of Kimura Sensei and the Wadaru of Otsuka Sensei were deemed to be lighter and quicker, for example, than the Shotokan. I'd be careful trying to name the founder of Shotokan, because that's actually not that easy. Because I think modern Shotokan owes a lot to the work of Nakayama Masatoshi, who did. You're right, Matt. Yes, he did discuss in his Best Karate series he glossed over it somewhat in his seminal work, in his Dynamic Karate, which was a very popular book with lots of us in the early 70s. I think, pretty much most of my friends had a copy of that book. There were two handbooks floating around during that period, very early 1970s. One was Karate no Kyohan, and the other was Dynamic Karate by Nakayama Masatoshi. The second point I wanted to mention, though, is, and we have discussed this before, one group who avoids any kind of kime is, of course, the Shotokai, which was under the auspices of the late Harada sensei, Harada Mitsusuki sensei. He was graded to fifth dan by Funakoshi Jichin sensei, but actually I think his main mentor with the soft karate was the real driver behind the Shotokai style, as opposed to Shotokan, which of course was Egami Shiguru. And interestingly, Shotokai, as we've discussed in previous episodes, Shotokai has absolutely zero kime, and you'd think that would lead to a floppy sort of an ineffective punch, but as we've discussed before, quite the opposite. Quite strange, really. So those were the 2 points I just wanted to add to make at this juncture.
Interestingly, the Shotokai still follows, in some respects, that idea of being decisive with one blow, though.
Yes, it absolutely, you're correct, Tom. That is the nature of modern and modern rather than postmodern karate. It's an excellent point, Tom. An important point, because it is using, I would argue, swordsmanship mentality. This is very carelessly put here, but it's bringing a fist to a sword fight.
The kind of the prominence of the makiwara as well in karate. You can see that where Kime kind of developed the rhythmic hitting of the makiwara one at a time, and then the idea of being decisive with a single blow. You can see how that kind of merges in the way that karate was practiced, particularly the Kihon. We discussed this in the Iken Hisatsu episode, where each technique is an end in itself, but only doing one at a time, and you can kind of cultivate that kime and that muscle tightening. And what we see in kata competitions is almost become caricatured, where you have this extreme form of kime, where it becomes really performative. Not to say that it's not absolutely dynamic and athletic in its own right, but I wonder what that's got to do perhaps with fighting or the origins of the antique kata, which we'll get to. So yeah, there's maybe a few streams running together there, and it kind of becomes, I think it's overemphasized. And again, something that's been mentioned before by Nathan in relation to Kime is that you don't see it in full contact fighting. So I wonder what place it has for real combatives, full contact or real fighting in the street and so on.
Yeah. I think as well, Tom, you and Matt both had. I think you had some good kickboxing instruction. I think you had a world-class kickboxing instructor who was very professional. I'm not lording it over him. He came on a couple of my seminars, and he was a gentleman, but very talented. And he reminded me of the boxers that I did meet some. I remember Frank Bruno's one hand was sort of like almost like when I put my knuckles together, my two fists together, they're basically the size of his. That's a slight exaggeration, but that is an incredibly powerful, huge man. I remember having a discussion. I remember giving him, not that I'm qualified to give advice to world boxing champions of the accomplishment and prowess of Bruno. And like him or not, I think he was an amazing ambassador for British sport, and I think an accomplished boxer. But I dropped him a tip, and I was young and precocious and noisy and opinionated. But I said that when he fought Tyson, I just dropped him a note and said, it was a handwritten note delivered by a friend. I said, he's just going to move to the side. He's going to go from side to side. Because I was aware of the peekaboo style of Castanata, because I studied such things. I was interested in such things. And yeah, Mike Tyson, without getting into technical boxing, he went from side to side, and he would habitually leave, hooks, bombs in the midline, delivered from a corner, from an angle. And Frank had quite a linear boxing style. He was a jab and a right cross man. Good boxer in my view. But the style of the peekaboo style of Costamata was the complete antidote to the straight jab and cross punch, as I'd experienced it with Eddie Veerling, who provided me with some very useful boxing instruction. I mentioned him in previous podcasts. Another tremendous boxer. He was a world-class boxer. Anyone can check this. He was ranked 11 ABA in his time. And again, a very similar, very sort of, I suppose, English boxing style, very British, but a very jab, right cross sort of, and combinations, completely different from the peekaboo style of Customata. Point being, I don't recall much in the way of a Kime other than something connecting with the punch, either a person's head or body, an opponent's head or body, or a focus mitt or a punch, a punch bag. And everyone who's hit a heavy punch bag with a karate blow, for example, and no disrespect to karate, well, I'm sure everyone that's done that knows the disappointment, can recall the disappointment that they felt when they landed their amazing karate punch, on a long hanging bag and realized it didn't even really dent it, and one had to then regroup and rethink. Why isn't that not? And we look at the boxing guys, and they're the bag's swinging when they're hitting it. So, and I think that, and the idea that you needed to Kime your punch in some way was restrictive, and Tom's right to raise it, that the pugilists, the full contact guys and the pugilists and the, they're not as obsessed with the Kime. I'll just say one more thing here. When I was very young, I was actually first raised in the Shotokai, so sort of soft punch, flowing movement type karate. But the thing that I loved about the Kime when I really got into it was, and I'll be completely open, and I'm sure I'm not alone. I'm sure people will accept this globally. The lovely snap of the gi. When you threw out a punch and you got the satisfying snap of a traditional, well-bossed, well-starched, heavyweight karate gi. It was just part of the fun and the enjoyment, particularly when you're younger and more foolish, of karate, was that snap. And I think that many people world over really enjoyed that, and that itself became quite a thing, in quite a partial product of karate.
Just add a little footnote to Nathan, your comment about hitting the bags there. The Kime also seems to break down quite rapidly when you try to do more than one technique. So if you do a combination, you can't seem to Kime. It doesn't quite. It just becomes a bit of a mess. It sort of exists in that sort of one technique at a time, end in itself. And even watching, you know, people like Frank Brennan or Terry O'Neill, I mean, their kata is amazing, but you can't do it that quick. I mean, you can perform a singular movement quickly, but there aren't rapid fire combinations like you find in boxing or kickboxing or full contact, delivering powerful shots one after another. When Kime is involved, you actually have to remove that element to make it effective in combination hitting, which is obviously we know is essential for real fighting. So yeah, I suppose again that kind of highlights this my suggestion that it's completely become overemphasized in karate, and may have been something which, I mean, I'm just speculating here. It had perhaps a role in training, perhaps for delivering strikes to a makiwara as a form of practice that then became overemphasized as an aspect of actual punching in a fight or something like that. You know, when you hit a bag, you have to wear wraps and gloves in order to protect your hands. It may have been a protective mechanism to stop yourself breaking your hands on a makiwara or you know, something like that. But then gets taken to an extreme in, if you look at some of the freestyle American kata competitions where the Kime is very explosive and there's a lot of screaming and shouting and have a look, you know, yeah, enjoy it. But just on to the next point, which is, in some respects, Kime is almost like pumping the brakes. So if you, as Nathan pointed out, if you hit a bag with your Kime punch, it is disappointing because you're restricting yourself. The contraction has a restricting effect, like you're accelerating, but they're hitting the brakes right at the end, which makes me wonder if part of it, the origin of it, is in choreography. And in the Chinese opera and theatre, there's lots of complex kung fu choreography, as you still see in the films, and lots of the forms are representations of that choreography. And some of the antique kata that have survived in karate may have some of that quality in them. So yeah, is it better suited for choreography, the kind of extreme Kime, rather than for real fighting?
Yeah, I would. Yeah, just to build on that, I think there is a performative aspect. I mean, you and I both know with the with other Budo practices that we've undertaken over the years, sharp, decisive, clean techniques, even with the katana and other weapons, is really, really strongly emphasized in a number of
Yeah.
Japanese traditions. The desire, I mean, particularly with like Iaido, the desire being to have a beautifully whistling, clean cut that stops dead at a certain point. It's an aesthetic, isn't it? It's part of the performance. It's part of the show that you're putting on for people that are watching. It's entirely unrealistic that you'd bring a sword to perfect standstill at waist height if you were actually using it, because you wouldn't want to be putting the brakes on in any way, shape, or form until you've passed through the target. So yeah, I think it's very much an aesthetic thing. I think it's almost like a sort of theatrical no, I don't want to say special effect. I know that's a bit too it's not the right term I'm looking for. But in the absence of you know, all of the technology that comes with modern movie making and special effects and sound effects and everything, it adds something to the performance, doesn't it? It emphasizes something strongly so that people who are watching it know what the intention is. They know what's happening. And it's not as though, actually, sorry, it's not as though even you know, the films of the early 70s with Bruce Lee performing, it's not as though it was absent there either. you look at the postures that he takes on after he's delivered his 1-inch punch or whatever, and pausing in certain striking positions after he's knocked somebody 30 feet in the other direction. There is again that theatrical emphasis on something decisive and something that ends the whole confrontation.
Just to add into that, Matt, we briefly discussed this before we started recording, but Scott Park Phillips in his books notes that the kung fu choreography, the performative aspects of you just described, holding a posture or a shape or just a technique, is put in so that the audience can see it, and also to allow for sound effects to be added by musicians as well. And that even took place in Chinese opera and stage combat as well. So there would have had to have been a particular rhythm of movement and enough space for the sound effects to kind of arrive with the technique and things like that. So the idea of pumping the brakes on a punch to show it cleanly and clearly to the audience with a lovely, I won't do the sound effects, but you know what I'm talking about. You still see it today in kung fu films, and it really adds to the flavor of the fight and the story and all the rest of it. But in terms of the antique forms preserved in karate, some of those may belong in those traditions, and so that performative aspect of clearly showing a technique and stopping it, and or having something like Kime. I wouldn't say that Chinese kung fu has Kime, because we're talking about a Japanese word and something that exists in karate. But something like that idea of clearly freezing a technique or putting a brakes on it, or however you want to describe it, may have its roots there in the theatre and later films as well. And that, as with everything else that we've discussed, becomes absorbed, doesn't it? They're all influences that kind of compound together. So you get Kime as we find it today in its various forms.
And how big an influence do you think the Jigenryu was in developing this concept within karate?
I'd like to jump in and answer that, or contribute to that question. Although you and Tom are the swordsman, I don't want to flatter you, but I've seen your swordsmanship for years. And obviously we all had seniors and people, but I know a good martial artist when I come across one. And to answer your question, the Jigenryu, what I loved about them was the bokken, the idea of hard training with a wooden, hitting a post, absolute contact, impact, actual real blows, and the use of the bokken, which I think is, as far as I'm aware, young boys, and maybe some girls too, it's not a gender issue, but some young boys have been fighting each other with sticks since the Bronze Age, and probably before. And everyone in our group, did you not pick up sticks and do all kinds of mock fencing as kids? Of course you did. I can remember fencing matches conducted in earnest with my fellow 8 and 9-year-olds. I can remember that. And my boys practiced with blackthorn, good wood, homemade bokkens. We didn't bother trying to get them planed down, and they were just the right length, made to fit each person, and it was organic. And the Jigenryu had a lot of organic reality. There is a grim side to it, which we raised in our last conversation in respect of the Jigenryu, where I suggested that running at the post was also, as history tells us, our armies were destroyed once they began a retreat. When they were routed, that's when they suffered their losses. And I did make a suggestion that some of the thinking, which history will bear out, was that the pursuit of a fleeing opponent and cutting down that fleeing opponent was a part and parcel of the training. Notwithstanding that, the idea of that moving forward, strongly surging and striking the training post, and similarly in training, to attempt to do one's best in the encounter. It's all good stuff. It's all good warrior training. And I think the Jigenryu excelled in that. But I also think it was a singular influence on the, as we've discussed, on the formation and foundation of the modern art of karate, not so much the postmodern. And that I'm talking about the karate of the formation of the styles, the Goju-ryu, the Wada-ryu, the Shugokai, the Shotokai, the Shotokan, all of those, and they are quite influenced by Iken Hitatsu and the focus, except for the Shotokai, on the Kime. But I think, and Tom's already clarified that that's got not so much to do with the antique forms. And finally, I think that the performative is really Kime is a major component of the performative element of a Japanese martial art. It's a key element and component. It's pleasing to the eye. It looks good. It sounds good, and it's not real in terms of combat. But then I think we have to remember a distinction that needs to be maintained between civil policing, civil arrest, battlefield techniques, and performance arts. And I think, most of us that have practiced karate have not really, despite the tall stories and the legends, and most of us have not really used it in a there are always the discussions of karate teachers that work on doors, and I've known some of them, and it's true, but what they employed on doorman work or security work probably didn't have much connection with or to the antique kata at all. So I think in terms of Kime, I think it lends itself more towards the performative than the practical.
Just add something to that kind of that theme of Kime not belonging with the antique forms. So I suppose that the question then is, how do you practice the antique forms, the forms inherited from China? And I think that's what's central to our group and the group's, Nathan's and the group's research, is that we're trying to find out as best we can what the original functions of these forms are. And once you work out the original function, you can then determine how you should practice the kata. So what you find has happened in karate is this uniform way of practicing, of which Kime is quite a strong element. So all of the kata are practiced in the same way, all with a Kime emphasis, all with ki at varying points. The stances are all made uniform. The techniques are uniform, and things like that. And so you have to kind of almost do away with all of that when researching an antique form. And you have to put down things like Kime and the kind of uniform practice and go back to the beginning. Cutting a very long story short, try and work out what the function of the form is. And once you do, then determine how to best practice it. And what you will find in some of the antique forms, which were originally for the use of weapons, is that you do need to train certain types of grip. And that grip does need to be tightened at certain points, particularly on impact. So a pair of sai or a pair of tonfa, if you're going to hit someone with them or impact, you need to have a grip that braces the weapon for the impact as well, so that it doesn't fly out of your hand. So there might be a kind of Kime that does belong in some of them, but for the use of weapons as opposed for delivering a straight punch or something like that. But so that would be my argument for why, extending on Nathan's there, of why Kime doesn't belong in the antique forms.
Yeah, I just I would pick up on that point actually. approaching the antique forms in the way that you would, the modern pinans, and trying to do them, in a uniform way with lots of kime and everything like that is essentially to approach those forms with an assumption, and you already distort your ability, or you limit your ability to understand those forms and what they're for, if you've already started with a base assumption that that's how they should be done. Because the kime seems to the casual eye, it seems to demonstrate striking power and strength and decisiveness and all of that, and that, to approach those antique forms with that assumption is already to color your perception of what they could be about and what they could be for. And starting on that wrong foot, you're only going to go down the wrong road. That's, that's the way I would look at it anyway. And so I think it is incredibly valuable to try and work to figure the forms out, but to practice them in different ways and see how it feels to practice them in different ways with different emphasis, and just be open and open to the experience that they might give you, rather than trying to layer on something that has become overemphasized in modern karate and using that as a launching point. Because that, like I said, that can only color your perception and the way that you move forward, which isn't going to be helpful. That said, those antique forms that do deal with weapons use, that there is necessarily going to be an element of being able to control a weapon. You can't. That's we know that from handling various weapons over the years. You do need to have a decent grip, and it does, that grip needs to be firm, and if you're going to strike something with it. But that I hesitate to be definitive about it, but I'd suggest that that's something quite different to what kime has become in modern karate.
No, that's a lovely point, Matt. I think it's that a good grip on the weapon is essential and important, but it's not a defining quality of the performance or the training of the forms. So you can have a tight grip. It's just going to be something that's a standard part of it, but it doesn't become it doesn't influence everything in the way that modern kime has across the board.
No,
if that makes sense. Yeah. Well, to get a working understanding of kime as it is relevant to the Weiqi Sanjin, which has been such a subject of fascination to me for years. What I did was I struck car tires, well placed, well held car tires. Great lesson to find out just how you need to grip that tool so it doesn't literally jump out of your hand when you impact something. And I found the car tire to be quite useful. So I think to what Tom and Matt have said, there is a form of kime, and it is about being able to control and keep the grip on that weapon so you don't lose the grip on that weapon or its efficiency, and in any way diminish the power of the blow that you're delivering. So there is a natural form of kime, but it doesn't come from this theatrical, artificial snapping of the gi that people became so, including myself, became so in love with. There's in the same way that there's a natural control of the muscles right the way through the arm, shoulder, and spine in delivery of a decent punch against the bag, a heavy bag, as mentioned earlier. So these are natural forms of kime
they're not contrived, and they're not demonstrative or to make the snapping sound. They're there for, as we've often used the phrase on many occasions, function dictates form, and the actual hitting of something with the tool or object or weapon that you're involved with is quite a leveler, quite a teacher. So I just return us back to the dissatisfaction of a sort of a gi snapping punch to a heavy bag, which everyone that's tried that has had to modify if they wanted to come away without feeling disappointed or embarrassed.
Yeah, I was just going to add to Nathan's point about using the car tire with the sign. I think that was probably a really useful practice. And so there's two things I wanted to say about that. Firstly, that one thing I suspect that you noticed when doing that was that the movement required to hit the car tire with the sai and not have the sai bounce off is altogether different kind of feel to bringing the sai to a halt midair and with flair and panache and as if you were putting on a show. It's a different kind of feeling. One is very performative, the latter, and the first one much more functional. And I think those movements look quite different when they're done as well, and that's quite an important point. And the second thing I wanted to say, slightly tongue in cheek, is that if I were to say want to practice with a couple of, I don't know, Bajang Dao and practice my techniques, I think maybe an ideal training tool for me would be something like something that resembles a man or person with arms and a leg, so that I could actually just whack the dummy with the blades and practice making contact with something that was hard, so that I could practice using my Bajang Dao fluidly and know what it's like to connect with something.
Coming back to discussing decisive focus, let's talk about board breaking. It's a common part of modern karate, and while much of it is about psychological commitment, I wonder, does Kime actually factor into a successful break?
Oh, so I reiterate what I said earlier about the board breaking when I did Kung Fu? And they used to have, for the black belt, they'd have an inch thick piece of pine that you had to break. And if they didn't like the person, they would turn the grain towards them so it wouldn't break. If they liked the person, they would turn it the other way so the grain was away. It would split. It just says it all, doesn't it, really?
Well, indeed.
And I've tried it as well. And you can't break a board if it's the grain's facing towards you. It's difficult. If it's a fairly thick piece, it won't break. So give it a go.
Well, I can attest. I'm not alone in this experience, and I'm sure present company have had it too. But globally, there are plenty of people who've had the failed board breaking experience. I remember being incensed with some. It was just pine, but there were two pieces that wouldn't break, and I bloodied my knuckles trying to. So it was just pure ego and pride. Bashed away at the. Would they break? No, they didn't break. I ended up with bloodied, damaged knuckles, result of arrogance and pride. good lesson. Well, unnecessary lessoning. The reality is, it's just simple physics, isn't it? And to the casual observer, particularly people who don't practice any kind of martial art, seeing somebody breaking boards, because we associate board, this is wood. This person's breaking wood. Yeah, what are they breaking? Pine. Try breaking hardwood. You can't. It's again. This is in the demonstrative. So you're right, Kev. But I feel for you, and you had the same bloody knuckle experience. It's very common for people that mess around trying to break wood. Am I degrading it? No, that's not my business. Tamashiwari, these breaking techniques, is like I broke a brick once, and I was quite proud. But I used the Oyama Masatatsu method, because I always thought a person that broke a brick would just put a brick between two holding points and smash through it. No, that's not how it's done. The brick is held in one hand, usually the left if you're right-handed. Let's just say you're going to apply a sword hand strike, in the edge of the hand strike to the brick. What you do is lift the brick off the ground, usually a concrete slab, and you hit the brick hard. You have to hit it pretty hard, but then it hits the concrete slab. That's what breaks it. That's how that's done. And once I realized how that was done, I did it on a number of occasions, and I felt a sort of swelling pride until one of my friends, a non-practitioner, said, "Well, can you just break the brick on its own without hitting the brick into the floor?" And I secretly had to say, "No, I have tried that," and ended up with a hand that was bruised for a good 10 days. Tamashiwari, the breaking techniques, absolutely nothing to do with the antique kata.
I think, the board breaking goes back a long way, even right back to the early days of the Shotokan, and it might be a very early clue that Kime is not that effective, because if you're fortunate enough to have the grain the right way up and people generous enough to hold the boards firmly, you have to hit straight through it. So you don't stop and focus. If you stop and focus, you don't break it. You actually have to avoid Kime and go straight through the target in order for it to happen. So that might be a clue that it's not that effective after all. Just roll that grenade out at the end there.
Isn't it funny that probably more resembles the Shotokai punch than anything else?
Yeah.
Going through the target. Wouldn't try breaking a board with that fist, though.
No.
So it turns out that decisive focus might just be a performative pause for the audience rather than a killing blow. Whether you are hitting a heavy bag or practicing antique kata, it might be time to stop pumping the brakes. Thanks for listening to Great Karate Myths. If you enjoyed this breakdown, please subscribe, leave us a review, and share with friends. It helps us keep the lights on and the myths busted.